Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Yep.
The map that I show on the right-hand side does look rather fragile, to say the least. I received it only a few weeks ago in my role as sales manager for the London Transport Museum Friends. I was sent several maps, not of any transport interest, plus this one, which was folded and in an extremely fragile condition. And it was very difficult to open because of previous repairs that had been done to it. And the first thing I did when I could open it, which took some time, was to start removing the very flaky edges. It's very thin paper, and gradually reinforcing some of the folds with archival tape on the back. It took me about 6 hours, and I have since, well, in doing it, I've laid it on top of a spare geological map that I had. The geological map, there are hundreds of copies of it, but I felt that this map needed to be supported. It wouldn't be in a very good state if it were folded again. You can see that the bottom edge is rather badly damaged, particularly the southwest corner, and there are some other small gaps and pinholes, but now it has been stabilized. When it was sent to me, one of my colleagues said, oh, it's a tramways map. Once I'd got it conserved, I then saw this title, London Southern Tramways. Didn't know anything about it, but I have since found that this was a horse bus operation in South London. The first line operated between Vauxhall and down to Lower Norwood, and that opened in November 1883. The map also shows some proposed extensions. The system, the bulk of the system that's shown on this map was completed in 1887. It stretched to 6 miles in the end, but it was all horse-drawn, 2 horses per carriage. And I then set about sort of working out what date this map was, because it refers to the fact that the route between Vauxhall and Lower Norwood has been approved, but is not actually in operation. And I've dated it roughly to about 1882. The map itself, I don't know where it's actually come from. I suspect it was included in a report either to the directors or something that was being presented in Parliament, but a very delicate state, very thin paper, the original. And I don't suppose many of these have actually survived. The background map is at a scale of 4 inches to a mile, remarkably detailed. In some places, you can't always, when you get up close, you can't always read the name.
Just to tell Jerry I'm back in, Roma, it's John Davis.
In some places, you can't always read the detail, but I suspect that this is a standard map, the 6-inch map reduced to a scale of 4 inches to a mile. And doing some work today, I think it may date, the map itself, the background map, may date possibly to the early 1870s, but it's not completely up to date for 1882 or so. But The amazing thing is that this is the first time I have ever seen a horse tramway map. There are quite a few companies across London who operated horse tramways, but none of them, as far as I'm aware, ever issued their own maps of their services. We are aware that G.W. Bacon did produce some tramway maps in the late Victorian, early Edwardian period, but again, I've never seen any of those. When things are passed to the London Transport Museum Friends, we will always consider whether this is of historical importance. And I have shared this map with several people in the Friends organisation, and several people have actually got quite excited because they've never seen it before. Once we're able to get back to with the museum opening up, with the curators able to look at it, it will be presented to the curators, and they will decide whether they've actually got a copy or not. But it's a lovely background map, fascinating detail, and something unusual that I've never seen before. So thank you.
This is.
Hello. Okay, we're talking about transport interchanges, stations, and here's a picture of a station taken last week or a couple of weeks ago, which is busier now than it ever was. As you can see, there's no railway lines there, but there is a bicycle. This is Rain Station near Braintree in Essex, and it's on one of many, many what I call recycled railways, railway lines which have been converted into cycle routes. And railways are superb, disused railways are superb for cycle routes, being largely flat, traffic-free, and with interesting things along the way, and links to the town and the country. So can we look at the next picture? Ian, are you in charge of the slide? Next slide, please. Okay, this is...
Yeah, sorry, there's a time lag, I think, sometimes in it loading. I have actually done, but yeah.
All right. So this is the daddy of them all, as I call it. This is the High Peak Trail, now called the High Peak Trail, was the High Peak Railway. And it was designed, it runs from the Cromford Canal in the right-hand side to near Buxton. And it was designed, it's the earliest...
It runs to Whaley Bridge.
It was one of the earliest railways. It was designed as a canal, and it was also one of the earliest ones to be converted into a cycle route, which was in the early 1970s. So it was built in the 1830s. And one of the lovely things about it is, having been designed as a canal, it has flights of locks, staircases of locks, one of which survives, or doesn't survive as a lock, but it was converted into an incline with a fixed engine house. And that's at Middleton. You can see the truck on the left and the engine house at Middleton. And that's near we can't see the map very clearly on the screen, but it links with the Cromford Canal at the right-hand end of your picture. And the Middleton incline is somewhere where that little hand is in the middle now. And the Middleton Top, there it is, just the left of where the little hand is. That's Middleton Top. And that long straight section you see there was the inclined plane. Some cyclists cycle up it, others push their bikes up it. This continues for about 17 miles, and links with another one called the Tissington Trail. So those in the Peak District make magnificent cycle routes. Let's look at the next picture, which is... Okay, so the High Peak Trail we've just looked at starts just south of Matlock. In the bottom right-hand corner of the map there is Matlock, and up the top left is Buxton. And between Matlock and Buxton was the main line of the Midland Railway to Manchester. And that was disused, I think, in the 1960s, and there's a big gap between Matlock and Buxton, where there's currently no railway, but there is a very wonderful cycle route most of the way, called Montal Trail. And that, one of the joys of that is, it's, apart from the fact it's a very beautiful valley and there's magnificent viaducts, there are also these wonderful tunnels. And the one you see on the right there, the tunnel is open all day long with a lovely illuminated route through it. So the Montal Trail is another wonderful example of a recycled railway. And my third example is coming up any minute now. There is, we're still in the Peak District, and this one is part of what was the Manchester to Sheffield. I think it was the only, if I'm right, the only railway, electrified overhead DC railway in Britain. Oh, the railway enthusiasts will know better than I, but this was the Woodhead Tunnel. On the left, you see the tunnel, and on the right is what is now part of what's called the Trans-Pennine Trail. It runs from Liverpool to Manchester. It's a walking route, a cycling route, a horse riding route. It's a magnificent cross-Pennine route. It doesn't go through the Woodhead Tunnel, but it does do that stretch here. So Dunford Bridge, you'll see on the left. Sheffield is just a little bit further to the right. So yet another wonderful recycled railway. And the picture above it is a wire map. So that's a recycled wire map. It recycled electric cable. And the yellow line is the line of the railway, and the red is the line of the, maybe the red line's a railway. Anyway, it's alongside the route. There are various artworks and this wonderful kind of map in electric wire. Next picture is yet another. Now this is the first one devised by Sustrans. Sustrans being the organisation which promotes cycling, has been very instrumental in devising and supporting local authorities in creating these routes. And this was the first one that Sustrans did in the 1980s, I think this one was, which runs from Bristol to Bath. Again, it's the Midland Railway, it's the old Midland Railway, there it runs. An urban route, very, very popular, a great cycle route right through the middle of this intense urban area between Bristol and Bath, but a rural ride along the way, an easy ride, plenty of links. And then we move into London, and picture number 5, there it is. The top picture is a popular urban route in London, running from Finsbury Park to Alexandra Palace. It was supposed to be part of it was discontinued as a rail route, maybe everybody else knows, and I can't remember the date, and it was supposed to have been incorporated into the tube. That didn't happen because of World War II, and eventually that route was discontinued.
54.
Thank you. But on the bottom picture here is a trick, because that looks exactly the same thing. That looks exactly like a disused urban rail. It's gone, here we are, a disused urban railway. But it is a magnificent cycle route and walking route from Stratford to the Thames at Beckton. But it isn't a disused railway. And down at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the giveaway. That's what it is the Northern Outfall Sewer. So this was an 1830s development by Bazalgette, the creation of the sewerage system of London. And ingeniously, what the modern developers have done is on the top of this old sewer develop this very unlikely urban walking and cycling route. So not a railway, not a recycled railway, a recycled sewer, but just as good. That's my story. Thank you, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, John. If I may, it's not a recycled sewer because the sewer is still there under the embankment. They've just put a nice grassy flat top on it.
And you can smell it, and you can, from time to time, there's ventilation points, so you're very aware that the sewer's still there. You're right, it's not recycled, but it is reused.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No, not sure. All up.
Fine. In that case, unless John Harmon has a microphone and will make himself known, and at the moment I see he's still showing as not having a microphone, I will briefly repeat what John has sent over. John, who actually says that if we've got too many Johns tonight, we can always refer to him as the Sussex John, lives in East Sussex and has sent us 4 images from Polegate Station, not far from Eastbourne. On the left, we have the 1879 edition 6-inch map, and it shows what was known then as the Cuckoo Line, coming from the north and then joining the main Eastbourne-Lewes line, sort of more or less at 90 degrees, into Polegate Station, which is this one here. Memorize this because it's a spot the difference one. However, by 1899, the angle has changed to improve and facilitate the direct access to Eastbourne. So rather than sort of going to the left, to the west, and then having to sort of back in to get down to Eastbourne, which is down here somewhere, they've now changed the angle completely. See if we can zoom in on that. So that must be a very early example of a disused railway appearing on an Ordnance map. And in fact, there's a second bit of disused railway here as well, where they've changed the angle of the bend. The next map jumps forward all the way to 1982. And this is from the 125,000 map. And the Cuckoo Line itself has now been completely closed and is marked as disused railway. I think actually, probably when I was doing the editing, I rather naughtily cut that bit out in order to try and concentrate on the actual sort of Polegate area itself. Excuse me. But you can see the line of the second, the one shown on the 1899 map, but the purely north-south line of the original one has almost completely disappeared. There might just be a little bit of it down there. Finally, we move forward to an Explorer map from 2009. And all of a sudden, the disused railways have become trails, a bit like the ones that John was just showing us, which the dismantled line has become a Cuckoo Trail, which is a shared use recreational path. I think what's interesting there is the number of different disused railways there are there, although the 1066 Country Walk appears not to have been one. I might also observe that it's one of those bypasses that looks like it's half finished. If you follow the route of the A27.
The other thing worth noting is that the station has moved back to its original site.
Thank you, Peter, yes. Because it was the other side, if we go back a sec. That's right, in the first map, in the 1879 map, it's there, but in 1899 it's moved to the east, but as you correctly say, it's moved back to the original site. It's about 450 metres west, actually, the note says. Does anyone have any further comments, or shall we move on to the next presenter? Which I think is Jerry, but we'll see. It is. Jerry, far away.
Thank you, Ian. My theme is the symbology of interchange stations on London railway maps. And I'm sticking my head in a noose here, aren't I? With Michiel Rademakers and other railway experts here. We've got more knowledge than I've ever had about these railways. But rather than showing you the inevitable Beck diagrams of later on, we'll have a quick look at those. But I want to just show you how not only he but other people showed the growing number of interchanges as they went on through the early 20th century. I'm starting with this one, which is actually part of a carriage diagram showing the lines of the Metropolitan Railway after the now main line went out beyond Wembley Park Stadium in the top left corner there, but was essentially the original city line was that circle shared with the district, of course, in the southern half of it. But I want to concentrate on what these things look like. As you can see in that panel bottom left, interchange stations shown thus. You have diamonds showing individual stops. The red diamond was the motif that the Metropolitan Railway used for the station names on the platforms to make them show up from the mass of advertising which covered the walls of stations. And you can see that for interchanges, they had these explanatory boxes with a double diamond, not a bottle of beer, but a rather larger example. A motif
it works wonders.
Yeah, a motif that was used later by other people, but more of that anon. The next one, please, Ian. This is another railway that actually predated the London Underground as we now know it, and its forebears. And before Beck, this was done by George Dow. He did LNER's maps. He did a rather splendid fuller version of a diagrammatic map of the London and northeastern lines into London. I just chose this selection to show you how they used a motif which was often used for ordinary stops, commonly known as the blob. But you'll notice that where there are interchanges shown, they are these double open circles. Can we zoom in a little bit on that, perhaps, Ian? Are you in zooming mode? I think it's probably clear enough. Oh, that's a bit better. I just wanted to, that's right. Leave it on the bottom bit there. That's lovely. Thank you. These are other people's railways, technically, that are shown in outline. But where you've got an interchange, for example, Finsbury Park and Wood Green there, and King's Cross, of course, you've got these double open circles. Again, a motif which was used later by other people. I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that Finsbury Park to Highgate, and they're dividing to Finchley. Can we zoom out again? Back to Mill Hill and the Barnet line, High Barnet, and indeed at the time Alexandra Palace, were all lines that were transferred to the Underground under London Transport. The London Passenger Transport Board took these over, and they were planned for electrification, and the war put paid to that. So it was only Barnet and as far as Mill Hill East that happened of those. But we'll see more of that in the next slide, please.
Just before we move, is Hertford North the end of the line?
It was then. I don't know why my image has cropped that. I'm sorry, but
no, that was all I got, I'm afraid. So
I believe it was then, but that was part of the main line. I don't have it to hand anymore. I'm sorry.
If I may say,
the point of
Hertford
interest.
North line extended up to the main line of the Great Northern again, after just before the Second World War.
Thank you, Michiel. Did Jeremy want to say something there?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you go back to the Dow map, the line from Finsbury Park towards Highgate is the one which I think it was John Davis drew our attention to earlier on one of his maps, as now being a cycleway.
Thank you very much. Yes, and one of my favourite walks personally, because I'm the other end of Highgate.
Yeah, the line through Hertford North was, I think, open during World War One, but only one track, and it links up to Stevenage beyond Hertford North.
Thank you very much. There are more railway facts we could discuss on that line as well, but if I may, just for now, I want to stick to the London railways, and this is a London Transport Underground map, which you might not have seen before. It is by Beck, and it's one he did during the war. This is actually dated 1941, where he experimented rather interestingly using 60-degree angles, rather like he recommended for Paris, though he didn't get the job. And it begins to look recognizable as the London diagram did from the early 30s. He's got here, the dotted lines, of course, are the long delayed opened post-war extensions of the Central Line out to the top right corner there at Epping and Ongar. And the Northern Line, those dotted black lines, top dead middle, are what we just saw in the LNER map, or diagram, I should say. And although they actually did electrification work to Alexandra Palace, you could see a lot of it in the edge of the woods there until fairly recently. But it was never reopened after British Railways closed it, I think 1954. But Mill Hill was due to go, which is now a shuttle, and just a branch line just there. Thank you for the hand. That track was electrified to there during the war because it had I believe it was because it had a large military barracks there, but it never got electrified to Edgware and beyond to Bushey. The depot there, of course, for the transport buffs was known as Aldenham, and it became London Transport's huge bus works later on instead of the tube depot when it didn't reach there. But that was the point of this map was the interchange symbols are enormous, huge linked rings, the interlocked rings there, which is fascinating. But this didn't catch on. So let's move on. Next slide, please. This was Beck's post-war attempt at the same thing. Beck loved verticals. He loved 45 degrees and indeed 90 degrees on this. And you can see how complex the black Northern Line routes had become, where not just the city loop, but also the line we earlier knew was known as the Great Northern City Line and is now part of mainline railways, and is mooted in the last week or two to be returned to TfL control, interestingly. But you can see those dotted lines, which didn't last for long. But the interchanges begin to look the way they stayed for decades, where you have, under Beck, not only touching circles in the line's colours, you had the name of the line, if you look closely. If we can zoom in a little bit further, I don't know.
No, that's as far as it will go, I'm afraid.
You will, if you concentrate on one of those lines, you might just see on the green that it says, well, the green is perhaps a bad example, because the green then covered the Metropolitan, the District, and what we now know as the Circle lines. But written on the coloured lines are the names of the lines. But I just draw your attention, since that's my theme, to the interchanges, where Beck developed this rather neat method of having two open circles in each line's colour, linked by what looks like a white bar or tunnel. And it needed printing in close register, but it stayed that way for quite a while. If we can zoom out again, I think you had it included in the same frame. There was how it's done. Can we zoom in on that District and Circle line? Not sure why it's in a box, but thank you for doing that, Ian, including this. This is two parts of the same car line diagram, as they're known, route diagram. This one's for the district, and in yellow the circle line. And you can see the interchanges here have an open circle for the interchanges in the line colour, but through them are some sometimes multicoloured arrows showing the colours of the lines that pass through that interchange station. And that stayed that way for each of the lines for quite a long time. I sort of grew up with things like that, and I have a large collection of them, which is kind of interesting. I made the mistake once of gluing them to my garage door before I had the garage door replaced. I had to kiss goodbye to that lot. But anyway, we've all done silly things. And I waved goodbye to that garage door. I think, have we got a fifth one, or is that me? May I just go to
that's all, Jerry.
Okay.
Because the district line wasn't very high resolution, very high quality, I put that onto the previous slide.
If you'll forgive me, can I just take back the shared screen for a minute and show you one of mine of the current situation with that map, but I won't bother now because it's I've had my time, I think. But if we have spare time later, I have some earlier diagrams of what were called the Underground Railways of London and London Electric Railways examples showing how these stations.
Jerry, I mean, if you want, I have actually stopped sharing my screen, so.
Yeah, you carry on.
Okay.
You carry on. Thank you.
Yeah. One comment I would make was looking at the last full underground map was that Ealing Broadway, although it had two lines, did not have an interchange symbol.
Yes, they weren't always.
Interesting.
They weren't always
If you go,
consistent. Can we zoom in on that again? Next slide, but lower down. No, next one.
Sorry, next slide, sorry.
Oh, this one you mean? This
well,
one. Yeah.
in fact, Ealing Broadway is the same on both of them. It's just two stations.
Yeah.
But if you go back to the previous one.
Yes, that's there, isn't it? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. A lot of the, places like Acton Town.
This group here.
Yeah, you think there are two completely separate railways.
Yes, I mean, I stress that this particular design didn't last long.
No.
I don't know if it was foisted upon Beck or whether Beck foisted it on London Transport, but it didn't work.
Yes, you get the impression that you couldn't actually interchange between them beyond, that's Hammersmith, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's too clumsy, but what fascinated me was the enormity of those interchange symbols. They got in the way almost, but there's no mistaking what they are.
Yeah.
It's
Thank you,
like Venn diagrams.
That's me, Ian, if no one's got any more.
Yes, I would like to have a question about the first slide of you, Jerry.
Yes, Michael.
Was this the design that Johnston made, the predecessor of Gill? As for text design, because I guess that Johnston made the underground bullseye with a square with a diamond.
I didn't know there was a connection with him and the Metropolitan, but
Johnston was the designer who started the use of sans serif.
Yes, the Johnston typeface, which was adopted by the Underground, is not this. This is not his typeface. That is not the same typeface that you're looking at there. This one is much less consistent. I would say that's hand done for the job myself.
Do you know the date of this map?
This one was, it's described as about 1923.
Okay.
So I think even London Transport Museum is not that certain.
The lack of consistency you mentioned is interesting, because if we look at the A in Piccadilly here, it has a staff pointing to the left on the top, but elsewhere the A is totally sans serif.
I think that's a printing
You think that
error.
might be a print slip? Yeah.
Well, I think look at the different sizes and compressions and
Yeah.
condensing of these. I think it's hand done for the job. But I will look at that, Michiel, if you think there's a connection between Johnston
No,
of the.
I think you're right. I think there's no connection, because this is a very standard capital case sans serif, like the Ordnance survey used for what about? They used sans serifs for some special text, and I don't know what anymore. But they were hand drawn always.
Yeah, I'll secretly while we're talking, I shall out of sight get one or two other examples ready. So at the end, Michiel, I know you want to speak as well. I don't want to crowd you out, but we'll
no.
I can show you those after the main session.
Very good.
Thank you all. Unless there's more questions, over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Jerry. Decided to move away from railways onto planes. Actually, one place we're glad not to be going through in lockdown is London Airport, or Heathrow, or whatever you want to call it. But I thought I'd actually have a look at some of the ways that its development was shown on maps. So on the top left, we have the new popular edition, 1945. This is a digital download from the National Library of Scotland website, and I think we can see not much sign of an airport there at all. There is the word aerodrome in the middle of a field just south of Heathrow village, and if we look at the major roads crossing the area, or relatively major, we see the B379 running from Stanwell past Perry Oaks Farm through the village of Heathrow to just by the Magpies pub, which I think still exists. Well, on TripAdvisor, I found it there. That's one road that's going to get swallowed up. We also see the main A312 from Fagg's Corner. Does anyone call it that? I've never heard it called. Through the village of Hatton, and then sort of continuing in the same angle to join up just south of Harlington there, but with a minor straight road running more or less due north. So that's where we were on the map in 1945. Very soon, however, this was all to change. In fact, I suspect some of it might already have started changing when they published that map, because it was based on a 1930 full revision. This map has come, actually I've stolen this one from Wikipedia, and this is the 1948 revision. The full revision 1930, roads 1948, ignore the with later corrections, that's my map, not the Wikipedia one. And we see here now the B379 stops at Perry Oaks, or just short of Perry Oaks Farm, and then what was previously a sort of rather smooth curve minor lane is sort of put in this sort of large double bend to go up to Longford. In fact, on reflection, it's not the original route at all, because it's this little farm lane that's been upgraded to a minor road. We also observe, although it's not really visible on what the Wikipedia image gave me, and I've given you the entire image here, that the A312 no longer runs along this road, which has been downgraded to a private road or a local road. And we have London Airport not quite forming a complete hexagon in the middle. We've sort of got parallel runways, and where the terminals are going to be, and they didn't open until 1955, there is still plenty of blank space. I mentioned that the third map will be a 1948 with later corrections. I'm not an expert on Ordnance Survey maps at all, as anyone who knows my map collecting and interests. This happens to be the map that my father bought when he lived in Banstead just after the war, which explains its slightly beat up state, complete with old sellotape on the top left hand corner. When those later collections go up to, I don't know, because as I said, I can't see any dating on it other than just that, but it's clearly later than the originally identified 48 map, because the B379 running out of Stanwell has now more or less completely disappeared, although the zigzag top bit to enable people to get to Perry Oaks Farm is still there. And this confirms that the A312 has now become disconnected in the middle. There is this road here which may look as though it's been slightly widened, but the old route is sort of round the boundary of Heathrow or London Airport and not there. This was, of course, still well before the airport opened to general public use. It opened around 1952 for most public use, and the terminal buildings came a little bit later, as we shall see in a moment. I'm not sure how frequently Ordnance Survey maps are updated for things like this. Again, and I'm sure there are people on this call who would be able to tell me how frequently we might expect to see later corrections for something like that. So I have reverted to my own collection of oil company maps and found some Esso maps instead. These were produced by Edward Stanford Limited. The only reason Edward Stanford had the contract is that it was won by George Phillip, but George Phillip was simultaneously doing work for Shell, and it couldn't work for both Shell and Esso at once, so it just kicked it down to Edward Stanford, which conveniently also had a fairly large printing press that they were able to print large print runs. And the print runs on these things quite literally ran into the millions. So here are the two covers. The left cover was used from around 1950. The maps weren't dated, to around 1955. The cover on the right was used from around 1956 to around 1961, when they replaced it with a photograph. There are, we note, typical London double-deck buses hidden in both those images. But what I'm really looking for today are actually at the maps. So if we zoom in on the top left one, this one I have as being dated circa 1954, but in fact was the exact same, so excuse me, was the exact same design. Sorry. On all my early Esso maps from about 1951 onwards. We see that they recognise that the B379 no longer runs through Stanwell. They don't show the little lane that we saw on the two 1948 or 48 with revision maps. That's disappeared, that's gone. And they also show that the A312 now neatly follows that new straight road that we'd seen going more or less due north from the village of Hatton. There's no indication as to where there'll be any terminal or access to the airport. It's just floating there, almost like a Star of David in the middle of an otherwise blank space. Moving forward to 1955, and we find that the revised routing for the A312 has gone. And a new A312 has been built up through the back of Cranford and running up to connect with its former route somewhere in Harlington, or somewhere north of Harlington. So there's only one, the dating for these maps is, as I said, a little bit fluid, but we think that we know the schema, so we think this is only a year later. And Stanford had amended the map for obviously a fairly major alteration, the rerouting of the 312. Move forward another year to around 1956, and the tunnel into the airport exists, but it's kind of disconnected. It doesn't go anywhere. It sort of stops a sort of vague ring in the centre, and it's also rather inconveniently drawn to actually overlap the letter N, or the first letter N in the word London, which is kind of probably rather poor draftsmanship by whoever did it at Stanford. And in fact, I've seen correspondence that there was often arguments between Stanford's and the client as to how much they could spend on updating maps. I suspect actually Stanford's wanted to spend rather more than Phillips would allow them, as Phillips owned Stanford at the time. Finally, if we move forward another year to 57, we have finally managed to link the airport and the central area of the airport where the terminals were to the road. And this is a symbol that's normally only used for small villages. We see it there in the case of New Bedford. So it's unusual to see it actually related to what might have been, probably was, the roundabout at the entrance to the airport. Consistently all the way through, though, we see the magpies, which was on the Ordnance map, still marked. We also, and obviously motorists clearly liked pubs in those days, see the Coach and Horses and the Travellers' Friends and the Crown and Sceptre and various other local hostelries, just in case you were getting a bit thirsty while you were out on your Sunday afternoon drive. I could have gone through and shown one or two variations from later SO maps. I felt, though, it was probably more interesting because SO actually went as far as to produce a map of London Airport. And here we have three maps. The first one entitled London brackets Heathrow Airport, dating from 1962. Heathrow is sort of relegated to sitting on top of the word airport in the 1965 new guide. And in the second new guide, Heathrow has now sort of more or less taken over. It's Heathrow Airport, London. That one dates from 1968. All of which are great illustrations of the like. These maps actually are very popular with aircraft collectors because inside the reverse, the rear side of the map is entirely given over to liveries of the airlines using the airport and photographs of a few of the planes you might see arriving. However, as we are supposed to be talking about maps rather than aircraft, I thought I would just include the inset maps showing the airport. The first one, they're both entitled How to Get to London Airport. The first one comes from the earlier map, from the 62 map, and was a rather basic map, really doing little more than showing the major roads. It does show, of course, what happens to the 312, and we'll spot that there is now another amendment to it there. But it goes into considerable detail on the pattern of runways, as far as it will zoom in. Not much use to anyone trying to drive there, but it's an interesting sort of plan of the airport. In fact, there was also on the other side of, or next to this on the map, there was a detailed one highlighting things like the sort of the viewing areas and the car parks and the RSPCA Animal Rescue Centre, in case you needed to find them, but this is just the orientation map. It also does name the underground line station termini. And finally, the 65 and 68 maps had a not quite so satisfactory, I think. It shows slightly more detail, but lacks clarity, with an incredibly wide M4. And you know, I'm not sure I like that as much, although it is more in keeping with sort of SO's urban map style of the era. So anyway, those are my offerings, which, as I said, are airport based rather than rail based. And I'm afraid no one has brought along anything to do with buses or ferries, but any questions or comments?
I would like to point out a little detail on your first map, which is, I'm afraid, rather off topic, but very interesting, I think. If you look at the map, you will see from the magpie, there is a dot, a striped line going down 45 degrees. What is that? It is the baseline of the Ordnance Survey major triangulation of Clark of 1860.
Really?
And it had a top point inside that little bush, and its bottom line was the Hampton Poorhouse, which has totally disappeared. But it's very strange that in a map in 1945, a very much general purpose map, it's still noticed.
Yes, I would certainly have interpreted that as being a footpath.
No, it's the triangulation baseline.
I bet John King says something here.
Yeah, that's what I recognise. Yeah.
John gave us a fabulous tour of the baseline ends, and we went not only to that one opposite the Magpies, which has been slightly moved, if I recall rightly, John. We also went to the other end, where in Roy Close, Hampton, believe it or not, there is the cannon which marks the southern end of it.
Yes, the Hampton Poorhouse cannon.
And there are moves I can exclusively reveal here this evening that there are discussions afoot to put much more information around that southern end in Roy Close, Hampton, by local people and our society. So watch this space.
Ian. I was going to comment on is, in fact, it's the absence of the King George VI reservoir on that map, the big obvious feature difference. But sorry, was that John speaking, John Davis?
No, it was Mike Cottrell. Ian, can I ask, the original grass aerodrome, I think was Hounslow Heath Aerodrome.
Yeah.
That didn't really form part of Heathrow Airport when it was built. Am I right in assuming that?
As far as I know, I mean, I'm not an expert on this at all, but I did actually go to our good friend Wikipedia for the history of Heathrow, and in order to get some of the data when elements were built. And yes, that had been there for quite a long time. I think it had been there since the 1920s. But it was only when flights were civilian flights were more or less banned from using Northolt that they decided they had to develop Heathrow.
Right.
Because otherwise Croydon Aerodrome also was no longer viable and was moved out to Gatwick. So I'm not sure why they actually selected Heathrow, other than the fact that it's pretty flat. And I guess relative for its distance to London, there isn't that much in the way of habitation that would need demolishing.
No.
I think nominally Heathrow was built under wartime emergency powers as an RAF base. And like Gatwick Airport, they may have said, there's this little airport, this little aerodrome. We can start there and build a massive airport, sort of 10 times the size, with the old aerodrome in the corner. So it wasn't totally a new airport.
Okay.
I'm also wondering whether that 1945 map is completely fictional, insofar as whether there was really a bloody great aerodrome there already that, for wartime reasons, wasn't actually depicted on the map. Because it just looks far too small, even for a wartime airstrip.
I think it would have been a pre-war airstrip.
It was own Ferry, the aircraft manufacturer, was
Yes.
based there.
Yeah,
oh, yes,
that was
right.
then what was developed into Heathrow after the war.
That's right, because they got compensation of about $1.5 million eventually for it, but that wasn't until about 1960s. It was very, very late.
If you read the politics of the development of Heathrow, it's quite interesting that although it was ostensibly being developed as an RAF base, it was in fact intended to be a civil aircraft, civilian airport. There was a little bit of confusion there over its original purposes, but a con by the government of the day.
Nothing changes, eh?
Because they plus ça change, yeah.
I love the photographs taken about 1948 of the reception lounge, if I can call it that.
Yeah.
They were tents.
Yeah.
They were ex-army marquees.
Mm.
Right, shall we move on to our final presenter? David Watt, who has set this somewhat unusual map.
Right. Well, first of all, I might be having problems with my internet connection at this end, so I drop out.
Have a go.
I'm still here, but our friends on the internet are not helping. What this is the well, an amalgamation of two sheets of the Ordnance Survey 1 in 500 plans of central Newcastle upon Tyne, and what you have to the right, to the southeast of the word tunnel, is Newcastle Central Station, and there we are, so you've got the whoa. There we go. Now, so that's the actual station itself. To me, not least the dot immediately above the H of that is actually a posting box, which I thought was rather, there we are, which I thought was rather a nice little detail. It's not there anymore. But the other thing that I find interesting as well are all the offices, which are detailed there, which includes and includes descriptions of what actually goes on in those offices. Now,
yes, I can see these are waiting
what you're
rooms.
actually looking at, however, is there are waiting rooms. There's a refreshment room in there. There are ticket offices, and that sort of thing. Now, interestingly enough, for the historians of Newcastle, what you don't have there is what is known as the porte cochere, which is the sort of porch immediately outside Newcastle Central Station, which is now completely glassed in and looks rather posh, but jutted out into the very large street immediately to the north there, which is Neville Street. So that's Newcastle Central Station. Unfortunately, the station neatly ended up on two sheets. Now, and yeah, so it's on two sheets. And so now what you're looking at down there is the sheet below, which includes Robert Stevenson's locomotive works at Forth Banks, which I think is, hang on, well, yes, you've got Smith's shops down there. You've got the various foundries and things, and Newcastle Glassworks. A fantastic place to was the ground is at about a 45-degree angle down to the River Tyne. So you've built your locomotive works basically on the side of a whopping great hill. So that's the maps. What you're actually looking at there is the back of my waistcoat, because when it came to a lay steward at St George's Chapel at Windsor, I was told that I had to have a set of tails, so that should I meet the Queen, I was properly dressed. And so when it came to the lining of the tails, I decided that I would have the place which I actually, in many ways, started my adult life from, because I began my job at the Defence Geographic Centre by standing on platform 10 of Newcastle Central Statue. Did in the late 1980s. So a lot of this. Where did I find the maps? Well, we tried the British Library, they didn't have them. Tried the National Library of Scotland, they didn't have them. Various other places, and I ended up at the Tyneway Archive in Blenheim Street in Newcastle. And I went in and they just said, oh yeah, we've got that. Oh yeah, no problem at all. How do you want it? I said, well, you know, on a CD it would be handy. And my internet connection is unstable if I've cut out. Anyway, I eventually got the map on a CD, presented it to the lady who made the tails, and there it was, and we had a fantastic time putting them together. I should say that that's the back of the waistcoat. The lining of the tails themselves has also got the maps in as well, but I couldn't really get a decent picture of that. I couldn't flatten it out. And so that's my travel interchange. I should say that these days, of course, it is now an interchange between the National Rail Network, whatever it's called these days, the Tyne and Wear Metro, which goes at 180 degrees underneath the eastern end of the station, and also a huge new bus terminal which is outside the front of it. There's just one other thing to mention, that at the time of this map, there was of course only one bridge over the Tyne, which was to the east of the station, the famous high level bridge. And so in fact, when trains from London came up to Newcastle, they had to reverse for the second. Reversed at York before 1876, and you reversed again at Newcastle until 1906. And so by the time you got to north of Newcastle, you were completely and totally disoriented, because you'd sort of gone forwards, backwards and forwards again. And you eventually arrived at Edinburgh facing the right way. So that's my transport interchange. Thank you very much. Any questions? And not from Jerry, because I can't be bothered.
Dave, it's Mike. Dave, it's
hello,
Mike.
Sam.
Hello. After all this wonderful tailoring, tell me that you did actually meet the Queen.
Well, yeah, I sort of did. I've done 3 royal weddings. I ended up getting on the telly at one point, trying to show the Duchess of Gloucester to recognise the Duke of Gloucester either. So fortunately sat in where she was meant to. But oh, Heathrow Airport again. Hang on. No, what's going on? What's happening? Something's happening. I'm not entirely certain what. So yes, I've not been introduced to the Queen.
Okay. So
I do have a picture of me with the Queen, but I haven't been introduced to her.
Understood. Great. Thank you very much.
Everybody's out.
I think we've gone through, at one time or another, we've gone through all of Dave Watt's wardrobe. Have you?
There we are. See?
I bet you haven't got underground boxer shorts like I've got.
No, Nick Krebs has though. Nick Krebs has. I gave it to Nick Krebs. I gave a pair to Nick Krebs for at his wedding.
We don't wish to know that. Mr. Chairman, Ian, can I remind you that
he has. His wife has as well, actually. But
yeah. Well, before we go to the thank you, Ian, could we just ask Michiel to show us his map of open rail terminals?
Sorry, Jerry, but I think my contribution would be not in the same league as this. It's an interesting map, but maybe better shown as those interested in American USGS maps and American railways. I'm glad to present them a copy of it and enjoy it.
I'm not sure if that's a yes or a no.
I have given up sharing my screen, so that if anyone,
I can allow you, Michiel, to show it if you want.
Well, let's try.
Otherwise, I shall go to some. Unless anyone else has any questions or points to raise, I shall just show 1 or 2 more early underground examples of interchanges.
Cool.
So here we go, Michiel. You
started screen sharing.
It's a big file, this, I know. So it'll take a few seconds.
Probably very slow.
There we go.
In refreshing, but this is the the western shore of the Hudson River. And if I'm right, there were at least 6 railway companies having their original terminuses here. You can here see the Lackawanna, the Delaware Lackawanna at Hoboken. Do you see my
Yes, we see it.
my mouse pointer?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Well, then going south, that was the northernmost one.
Ooh.
Going south, we find here the old terminus of the Pennsylvania before 1906. Then the Pennsylvania goods yards. Even kijken. Nee, this is Pennsylvania station. This is the Erie Railroad. And you can still see in New York nowadays this large station of the Central Railroad of New Jersey. It's totally derelict. All these things are gone, and which is well, I think it's a sorry sight, but it's in line with the decline of the American railroads. We have Ellis Island here with the insulation hospitals, the Statue of Liberty, and the Hudson being such a deep river. Look at the depths and engines. It was not until 1910 or 1906 that it was possible to actually tunnel under the Hudson, because the old digging methods would not do, because the tunnel surely would flood. So they were tubing after the origin of tubing tunneling. And the first one was the Hudson and Manhattan, which is now the PATH. Finished in 1908, immediate success, of course. And after that, in 1910, the Pennsylvania bored its tube tunnels to Pennsylvania Station, which couldn't be done earlier because the tunnels had to be operated on electric power. And only after the 1900s, electric railroad engines were powerful enough to hold mainline express trains. Well, have we anything else? The interesting thing is how all these railroads found their way through the large hill, which is something like the spine of Hoboken and Jersey City. You see that there was tunneling, but also cutouts like this one and this one. Is there anything else to be said about this? This backwater is interesting because it harbored very many interesting moving bridges. Like here, this was interesting. This is the Central Railroad of New Jersey with its branch to Newark City. And just only that. It was extremely costly because all this ground is very, very marshy. So they had to spend very large sums in beefing up the track bed. And the railroad was a disaster. It was totally superfluous. It was driven out of business mainly by the Pennsylvania. And you see in this map from 1955 that it's already disused and taken away. There was another interesting bridge, which is not on this map, but it was here. It was the 4-track main line of the Central Railroad of New Jersey, also spanning the Newark Bay. And it had a magnificent set of lifting bridges of the same type as we in Rotterdam have still one, but there were 4 of them, two by two for 4 tracks. And they were put, well, the city of Bayonne tried to put them on museum, to make a museum deploy of it, but it was superseded because of shipping traffic safety. So they were taken down and removed altogether. What have we here? A lot of wrecks in a ferry, well, this seems to be, I think this is not so much a disaster scene as a shipwreck. I can really understand Americans' ways as they are, that when you had superfluous old vessels, you dumped them here in a corner. Staten Island, with this is now the transit, rapid transit line. This was originally the main line of the Baltimore and Ohio, who had their terminus here and connected to the Staten Island ferry. This was not very useful because it was a very long ferry line. So later on, they struck a deal with the Central of New Jersey and used this terminal. I think that's about what it is. If anybody is interested in this map, it's a little detail. The projection of this map is very unique. It's not used, as far as I know, in Europe, anywhere else. And it is, look at the bottom marginalia, it is where, well, it is polyconic projection. Anybody know about that? It's a very simple projection, which is, the projection is, imagine the sphere of the Earth and put conical conuses on it. Then you get a parallel line, which is the bottom of a cone. You unfold the cone and you get a bendy map in sectors. Now, that's not very practical, but the beautiful thing is, at the 1 in 24,000 scale that this map is, all the bendy lines turn out to be indistinguishable from straight lines. So effectively, you have a trapezium here, which makes that the map cannot be tiled. You only have one map, but the plotting inside the map is very easy, because you just can measure out eastings and northings and measure them in the sorry, I'm lost on my English on arithmetics. I guess you see what the point is about easy plotting. As far as I'm concerned, this is it.
Yeah, thank you, Michiel. That was a very full and very interesting summation of a very complex map indeed. I don't think I've ever seen such tight track maps in my life, but fascinating as well. As usual, you have an amount of information on such a small area, but that was fascinating. Thank you. Ian, do you want to add any more?
One thing to bear it.
Go ahead.
Just one comment, Jerry.
Dave.
Hello. Just one comment. It's worth bearing in mind that I mean, when I was working in our map library in the 1980s, what you're looking at there is what's known as a topo quad, a quadrangle map, which is a 1 in 24,000 scale, which covers the whole. Well, was meant to cover the whole of the United States. It is incredibly
7.5 minutes quadrangle.
Yeah. It is even in the 1980s. It was incredibly out of date. It was massively out of date. The USGS simply could not keep up with the revision of it, and so it was basically useless as an actual piece of topographic mapping.
Very good for history.
Very good for history, but absolutely useless if you were trying to navigate your way around New York. Well, anything from about the 1940s onwards, it was absolutely terrible. And as a result of that, the USGS had to completely rethink as to how they were going to do their revision, and there you go. But there's all sorts of issues with copyright as well. Oh, hello.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed, Neil. Ian, did you want to add anything to what we've had?
No, I didn't at all. It's nearly 9:30. I'm not sure what time we said we'd be finishing, but I guess that's probably getting towards the end.
I think we're probably right. I think there's so many experts here. You will have seen some of the earlier underground maps I was going to show. So I think we'll take that as read. It's been a splendid turnout. Thank you, Ian, very much for hosting us.
Well, thank you, Jerry, for making Zoom available again.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Very interesting session.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Michiel. Thank you, the Johns. That was a good session. Anyone else, any points to make? Please unmute and speak. Otherwise, thank you and good night.
I was going to comment that something I spotted on Mikhail's map was some drive-in cinemas.
Aha.
Well, funny enough, I was going to comment there was a bus garage on one of them. I commented that we hadn't managed to get any bus garages on our maps, but there was one on Mikhail's map on the Manhattan side of the river.
Was it Manhattan or Brooklyn or Staten Island?
Manhattan.
I
think.
Pass.
It was quite far. It was quite far south.
We recently went to the drive-in cinema at Nebworth and ended up as part of a photograph in the Daily Telegraph, which we've copied and put a little ring round and said us. Anyway, night everyone.
Great stuff.
Yep. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you all. Good luck.
Yep. Bye.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, Ian.
Yep. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
You're welcome. Good to see you all.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye.